Good evening. We are pleased to welcome you to the 7th Annual Golden Apple Award Ceremony. As you all know, we are here to honor Dr. Eric Mann of the Biology Department. Shortly, he will honor us with his ideal last lecture. SHOUT, an acronym which stands for Students Honoring Outstanding University Teaching, oversees the balloting process and plans for tonight's event. On behalf of the SHOUT Committee, we would like to thank everyone whose support for the Golden Apple Award has afforded us the opportunity to recognize some of the truly outstanding professors at this university. In particular, we would like to express our appreciation to our advisor, Michael Brooks, and the many sponsors who are listed in tonight's program.
As students, we are extremely grateful for the opportunity to thank our professors for their valuable instruction. As a committee, it is with great pleasure that we read the students' nominations for this award, which praise our professors at Michigan for their care, devotion to their students, and energy for their subjects. Of course, we were very impressed with the comments we received about Dr. Mann, and we would like to share some samples with you to give you an idea of the impact that he has on his students. It's hard to find science professors this dynamic, friendly, and entertaining, and skilled in using their intelligence to help others absorb difficult material.
He really cares. I have never had a professor who facilitates and is present at every single lab section Monday through Friday, including nighttime labs. He truly enjoys what he is doing.
Eric makes lecture fun and interesting. I wish I had it 7 days a week.
His class rewards you if you study hard and put forth the time.
He infuses his lectures with interesting historical references and has an amazing knack for analogy that can make even the most difficult concept easy to understand.
I can honestly say that he made me want to learn immunology, a potentially disastrously boring subject.
Hillel is especially proud to be involved in honoring excellent teaching. Here to reflect on Hillel's participation in tonight's event is the Assistant Director of Hillel, Rabbi Rich Kirshen.
I got the applause now, I don't need to say anything. A few words of moderate Torah, and to explain a little bit why Hillel has been a sponsor and a driving force behind the Golden Apple Award. There's a quote in the Talmud, and it says, Shuv yom echad lifnei mitatach. It's by Rabbi Eliezer, and it says, you should repent or take an accounting of your life one day before your death. Now there's a problem. You don't know the day before your death, or at least most people don't. And what the rabbis have taught us is that really you have to make every day as though it was your last day and live it to the fullest. And that means conversations with our loved ones, conversations with our students, as though they were the last conversations we were having. And appropriately so, this is entitled The Last Lecture, really meaning that it's the ability to capture each lecture as though it was one's last. And a quick story is a story in Jewish tradition it's a story about a man named Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Kotsk, known as the Kotsker Rebbe. And upon the death of his master, someone came up to him and asked him, how did he feel about the death of his teacher? And what was most important to his teacher? He stopped for a moment and thought, and he realized what was most important to my teacher was in fact whatever he was doing at the moment. The Golden Apple Award is really our chance to honor people who are able to capture these moments, and it's truly a blessing for us. So tonight we honor Eric Mann, and we honor Eric Mann tonight. Thank you.
Last year, we were proud to recognize Golden Apple recipient Dr. Carol Boyd, Professor of Women's Studies in the College of LS&A and Women's Health in the College of Nursing. Tonight, we are pleased to introduce Dr. Boyd, who is here to share some of her insights about the award.
Well, it's really fun to be back here tonight. It's even more fun to not be giving the lecture, I'm going to tell you. It's really nice. And I'm sure that Dr. Mann will have more fun after this lecture. I was thinking, I was asked to reflect on what this award was like, and I wasn't reflecting, I was obsessing. And my 7-year-old last night, as I proceeded to obsess, said, "You're not paying attention to me." And I said, yeah, well, I'm kind of worried. I have to give this speech tomorrow night and introduce the next Golden Apple recipient. And I don't know, I want to be witty, but I feel like I should be dignified. And so I just keep going, witty, dignified, witty, dignified. And he said, "Mom, you're missing the point. Why don't you just tell them how happy you were to get the award?" And I thought, this child is right, because this award, Dr. Mann, is going to change your life. From now on, when you walk across the diag, people will stop you and congratulate you for the Golden Apple. Now, it's not without some pitfalls, because on occasion, my 11-year-old has said it should have been called the Golden Crab Apple Award. But most often, it is truly one of those events in your life that make you feel appreciated and make a difference in your teaching. So tonight, we are honoring Dr. Mann, and I am looking forward to his lecture, as I know you are. The person who's going to be introducing him tonight is the chairperson of biology, Dr. Julian Adams, and he will be speaking to you briefly about Dr. Mann. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, being chair of biology, a large department as we are, is not a lot of fun, but one of the things that makes being chair rewarding, and it doesn't happen very often, is when I get to reward, or when I get to introduce one of, or the top teacher in the department. And I'm absolutely thrilled to be here tonight to be able to introduce Eric Mann, because I believe that he richly deserves this award. We've thought this for a long time in biology, and I'm very happy to see that shout, and sponsored by Hillel, and I also noticed sponsored by the psychology department and the chemistry department of the Lit College, has decided to agree with us finally that Eric is in fact well deserving of this award as best teacher. Now, I probably should say a few words to you about why I think that Eric is a good teacher. And I really don't think there's any secret. I think that Eric's a good teacher for the same reason that in the department are good research scientists. And it all goes back to a quotation, a statement that Thomas Edison made a number of years ago. And he said that research is 95% perspiration and 5% inspiration. And I think the same thing is true of teaching. That Eric is a good teacher because he works so hard at it. We've already heard tonight from the comments of the students that he's in the labs morning, afternoon, and evening. But I often see him on Saturday mornings and Sunday mornings and during the summer when he's not teaching, working on his labs, planning new exercises, trying to come up with new ways to interest the students in microbiology. And I think that's the secret behind Eric being a good teacher. I think he works very hard at it, and that brings out the inspiration. That brings out the excitement. He's interested in microbiology. He loves the field, and he wants to work at it, and he wants to project that passion of his science to the students, and working hard makes him succeed in that. Now, before I introduce Eric, I should probably tell you a little about his life and how he came to be here at the University of Michigan, because actually he's not a native Michigander. He grew up in the Southwest. He got his first degree at Southwest Texas State, went on to the University of Texas at Austin, got a master's degree, and then a PhD also from the same institution in Austin. And from there decided that the way to go in this country was west. And after serving briefly as an instructor at the University of Texas at Austin, my old alma mater, that's University of California at Davis, where he worked in the micro department, and he worked actually for a friend and a colleague of mine in micro for a number of years. And one day he was reading the pages of Science, and he noticed there was an ad for a lecturer at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, and applied for that position and called us up and said, well, what's Ann Arbor like? And we said, well, we actually have palm trees just like you do out in California. We forgot to mention that they're in the chemistry department, and they were dying at the time, but but he said, oh, well, he says, is the weather just like it is in California? I said, sure it is. I forgot to mention that it was inside the buildings. It was the same as the weather in California. So we convinced him to come out to visit Ann Arbor, and luckily he came out one of the 2 days in the year when we have nice weather. And he said, yes, I think it's just like California. So we managed to convince him to accept our offer, and I was delighted, the whole department was delighted, and we've been thrilled ever since. And with that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Eric Mann for his last lecture.
Before we present this award, Dr. Mann would request that all of his graduate student instructors and his undergraduate teaching assistants join him on stage to receive this honor along with him. So if you guys would please come up.
Wow. Okay. Professor Mann, on behalf of the Shout Committee, I'd like to present you with this poster, framed poster. Here you go. This check for $1,000. And the Golden Apple Award.
All of you who have had me for classes are aware that I absolutely cannot stand microphones. But once I saw this auditorium, I realized, hey, this guy is really big, and I'll lose my voice real fast if I try and project throughout. So I think I have just about all of my props here, and I'm about ready to go. Now, again, those of you who've had me before realize this is a little bit different. I'm up here seated instead of standing and wandering around. When Shout first came up to me and gave me the award, I actually thought it was a practical joke. I didn't believe it. And then when they told me, I actually didn't believe it until the Daily contacted me by email. And then the Daily says it's true, then it definitely must be the case. And when I met with Shout, actually when I met with Rachel and Ilona to figure out the basic logistics here, they said you can do anything you want to. And of course you can imagine what I had planned. We were going to have dual projectors up here, we were going to have a carousel in the back. It was going to be a real sound and light show. And then I asked them, but what are you guys looking for? And they said, well, as the rabbi said, it's intended to be your last lecture. You know, think of it as though this is the last lecture that you're going to be giving. And I thought about that over the weekend, and I fully realized that for many of you, this is the last lecture that you'll be hearing from me. And so I changed track real drastically, and so what I'm going to be doing tonight is I'm going to be taking Shout at their word, and I'm going to be pretending that this is the last time I'm ever going to be speaking to most of you. Several of you who have had me before have heard similar type things in lab during our last labs, when, you know, everything's all cleaned up, we're getting ready to go, and we just hang around and talk. So tonight, what I'm going to be doing is talking. This is basically off the cuff. These are my notes. They actually fit on a 3x5 card. But I'm going to try and not refer to those. We're going to try and keep this as a cappella as possible. One thing, Jim, can I go ahead and get the house lights? Okay. Got them? Okay, when I first came over here and saw Rackham, it was just sort of, wow, what a magnificent building. So I decided to do a little bit of research in this place. Rackham, and actually I didn't do the research. It was, let me get the name to be sure, it was Nancy Bartlett who provided me with these data. This building was dedicated on June 17th, 1938. It was built at a cost of $1,660,692.55. Someone was doing some very tight accounting at that time. When I first saw Rackham, this was when I first came to U of M for the interview, it reminded me of something from the Emerald City. It's like something out of The Wizard of Oz, and the more I've been inside it, the more it reminds me of that. And you have to remember, of course, it's contemporary with the movie The Wizard of Oz. Both were doing modern, quasi-classic Art Deco like this. So I think the auditorium is absolutely fantastic, and I wanted to just sort of give the building some credit before we got started. Now, initially, at this point, I was going to be having my TAs stand up, and I was going to be asking for applause from you guys. But then I got the idea from Shout, well, why don't you just go ahead and have them come up and get the award with you? And so I do want to take this incredibly public opportunity to thank all of my GSIs, graduate student instructors, and all of my undergraduates. The labs that you've seen from me at U of M, the classes that you've seen from me at U of M couldn't have been done at the level they were done without their help. I'd also like to thank Dr. Adams and Dr. Hume. Dr. Adams is our department chair, Dr. Hume our curriculum chair, and without their support, none of this would have been possible. And then especially, I want to thank Sharon Minnick. Sharon is my prep person. She preps microbiology. She preps cell and molecular biology. She also preps genetics, and she preps developmental biology. Have I gotten all the stuff you prep? Okay. Without Sharon, basically the department would come to a screeching halt. There would be no upper division labs at U of M without Sharon. So Sharon, basically this golden apple belongs to you as much as it does to me. I really do appreciate all the help you've given me. That's Sharon Minnick sitting there trying to look very small. Stand up. Stand up. Okay, since I don't overhead, let me give you the basic format for tonight. It's going to be divided into 3 parts. Part 1, I'm going to talk about my first 2 months at U of M, which is basically 2 months of unmitigated disaster. Then I'll be talking about my first term at U of M, which was very interesting. And then in the third part, I'll actually be getting to the point. I will be building up to the point of the lecture during that third part. Okay, let's begin at the beginning. I feel like I'm at a track meet with this guy. I arrived Detroit Metro on a United flight direct from Sacramento. And I got in at 10:05. By the time I ended up at Hampton Inn down on Victor's Road, it was something like 1 o'clock after I'd gotten all of my bags. I was really, really tired, really, really zonked. Got in my room, got ready for bed. By about 2 in the morning, I realized I had the only room in Hampton Inn without a functional heater. It was cold. It was 30 degrees outside. When I had left Sacramento that morning, it was 88 degrees. So it was quite a change. So what I did, instead of, I was so tired, I didn't want to run down to the desk and, get a change of room. So every 15 minutes or so, I would get up, go in the bathroom, and run the heater in there for a while. Warm up, go back, get into bed. There were no blankets in there. They comped the room the next day, I have to say that, for Hampton Inn. The next morning, I woke up bright and early, and over at the window, there was this strange glow in the window. I'd never seen this sort of light in the window. And so I walked over there and looked out, and it snowed. There were 4 inches of snow. And I immediately snapped on the radio and the television because I was expecting the governor would surely be calling out the National Guard. There'd be a state of emergency. You obviously could not go anywhere in weather like this. Well, I turned on the radio, television. No, it seemed to be normal. They were going, okay, 4 inches. We're expecting another 2 inches later on. Okay, so Hampton Inns, they include breakfast with your room stay. So I went down for breakfast. And so I'm down there sort of dopey, wandering around my first full day in Michigan. And I go into the breakfast area, and there's a man sitting there. He's a businessman, and he's wearing a suit. And I have to tell you, I have never owned a suit in my life, and one of my goals is to never have a job that requires wearing a suit. And I was watching this man, and I was catatonic because he picked a box of Fruit Loops, and he ate Fruit Loops for breakfast. And I was standing there going, my gosh, I have moved to the state that makes the Chevy Caprice Classic, and here's why. People here eat Fruit Loops for breakfast. And being a good Californian at the time, once I moved to Michigan, I became far more Californian than I had ever been in California. I went over and got bagels. And they had a type of bagel I had never seen before. These were blueberry bagels, bagels with blueberries in them. I wasn't into bagels at all when I was out at Davis. So I grabbed, actually I took 4 of those because I was going to, make breakfast serve for lunch also. And I grabbed my 4 bagels, went over, sat down, and they had a copy of USA Today. And so I turned to the weather. And here is this big mass of blue throughout the Great Lakes, blue and white, 20s, 30 degrees. Out in California, it's nice and green and yellow and orange. It's 60s, 70s, and 80s. And I may have made a mistake here. And I was sort of distracted looking at the paper. Actually, I was in shock looking at the temperatures and bit into the bagel. And the smell of blueberries came out of that bagel. Now, Rich could probably explain this better than anyone else in the room, but the olfactory nerves seem to be hot-wired to the brain. If you smell something, it goes right up there, and it can trigger some really interesting memories. And so I was sitting there, blueberries, and I'm sort of going into this trance. And it brought me back 35 years. It took me a memory I had completely forgotten. 35 years ago, this is true confessions time for me, we lived in Sault Ste. Marie. So in fact, I can lay claim to being an ooper. And in fact, back then, being an ooper actually meant something more than it does now, because the bridge wasn't built and you had to take a ferry up there. You had as long as 9-10-hour wait for that ferry. You know, the Upper Peninsula was really, really separated. Okay, back to the blueberries, the memory. I remembered picking blueberries with my mom and with my brother. My dad was in the Coast Guard, and so my dad was out tending the buoys, you know, all those little things that clank and glow and mark the channels. He was the guy who put them all in their proper place when the ice came through and swept them away. So, you know, he was constantly on patrol. So it's me, my mom, and my brother. Now, my brother, any picture of my brother, and he's always got his arms around me from behind in a bear hug, or he's got his arm around me from the side. He was always very, very protective of me when I was growing up. So this was a very, very warm memory. Those of you who've wondered, the eternal water bottle, which has been, it's going to survive just one more time. I think the cap's about to disintegrate. My brother gave me this in 1982. So this water bottle has been with me with just about every lecture. It means a lot to me. It's something that he gave me. And then my mom. My mom was an extremely important factor in my growing up. My mom had to raise us without any help from my dad, and it's because my dad was on. He wasn't a deadbeat dad, he was a 50s dad. And back in the 50s, dads went out and earned money. And in the service, that meant that he simply was very, very rarely at home. So my mom was one of the most intelligent people I have ever met, one of the most supportive people I have ever met. And this memory was of picking blueberries in August, and it was hot. It was incredibly hot. And my brother and I, we'd take the blueberries and plink them into a metal pot, but half the time we'd be eating them. And my mom had brought along a big thermos of lemonade. And this being back in the 50s, we had those hideous aluminum tumblers that come in different colors. And when you drink out of them, your teeth make contact with it, and it's sort of like biting into a battery. You get this real charge into your mouth. About this time, back at Hampton Inn, I looked up, and the guy who had been eating his Fruit Loops is looking at me sort of goofy. And of course, I'm sitting there with a bagel halfway up to my mouth, sort of in this trance. So I realized, okay, so that's set piece number one. I had this intense memory, a very, very pleasant memory of times in Michigan before. I had completely forgotten that throughout the interview. So, on to the next activities. I went ahead and got an apartment. I got an apartment within 24 hours. Amazing. And throughout the interview, I had a 2-day interview here, and the chair, the previous chair, not Dr. Adams, the previous chair, who will remain nameless, had told me, had emphasized to me that I had a fantastic prep person for my courses. And this woman was called Betty. So one of my first jobs was to look up Betty. We've got to find Betty. We've got to talk with Betty. Prep people are make or break people. A good prep person can make your life very, very simple, can make the courses really flow. A bad prep person is absolute hell. And so I went up to the medical school. This is back when microbiology was taught up at the medical school. So I had to go up to micro for the labs. And I tracked down Betty, and I was sitting there talking with her. She was obviously very, very good at what she did. I could tell from talking with her that she was going to be a wonderful prep person. So I was sort of, good. And all of a sudden Betty goes, "What are you doing Friday?" And I'm going, "Well, when Friday?" She goes, "At noon." And I go, "Well, I think I'm free. I don't know anyone within 1,500 miles, so I think I'm free." And she said, "Well, I'd like you to come because the department is giving me said, wow, this is neat. You know, what's going on? She goes, I'm retiring. And I'm sort of, oh my gosh, you know, my whole professional future passed before me. And I'm, well, is your replacement going to be there? And she says, well, they haven't hired anyone yet. And, you know, we're talking about mid-November at this point. And I was just sort of, oh my gosh. So I wandered back onto campus just, really, really depressed. Got back to the department, and there was this big oblong box in the mailroom, about like this or so. And I knew what it was immediately. It was my favorite possession, my prized possession. It was my 1973 Raleigh Grand Prix. This was back when we called them 10 speeds. It was the world's most beautiful bike. I was in fantastic condition, candy apple red metallic finish, not a scratch on it, my prized possession. And so this was, okay, it's going to work out. Don't worry about the prep person. Your bike is here. You can't ride the bike. It's too cold, but don't worry. So I tore the bike open real fast, the packing. And you really can't tear a packed bike open that fast. And the frame was bent. It had been damaged in transit. There's actually a take-home lesson here that I can give you. Never entrust the packing of your bike to a former student that you gave a C-. So I made a serious error in judgment there. Okay, fast forward a couple of weeks. We're well into December. I was up in the office. The office I was in, Marcy Osgood currently has this office. It is the world's coldest office. Marcy at least has the intelligence to move some auxiliary heaters in there. I froze that first winter. And I'm sitting there working away. I was actually wearing my coat while I was working on my course pack. And I heard rain outside. Nothing usual. I mean, it does rain in California. And then I started hearing cars and their wheels spinning. And I'm going, why are wheels spinning when it's raining outside? This just doesn't make any sense whatsoever to me. I got up, looked outside. Yes, it was raining. There were raindrops going down the glass. And I figured, okay, Michigan drivers just don't know what they're doing. It was around 11:30, 12 o'clock when I decided it would be time to go home. So I suited up, got everything ready, went out the door over by the auditorium, and slid approximately 20 feet before I stopped. I was experiencing my first ice storm. I didn't know that you could have liquid water falling from the sky and then freezing on contact. I live about 3/4 of a mile from campus, and that walk home was just treacherous. I mean, I was just going, it was like moonwalking. I was going step by step by step. Right before my apartment, there's a big hill. And some snow had occurred over the past couple of weeks. And one of the things that I had noticed that native Michiganders do when the sidewalks got icy, they go over and walk on the snow. So I figured, okay, I'll go over to the snow. I chose, however, to go over to a driveway which was slanted that was covered with snow. And so as soon as I stepped, wham, I went horizontal and horrible pain in my arm. Next day, I got a confirmation at the health center I had broken my arm. And it was just a chip, thank goodness. So they didn't have to put it in a full cast. But what they did, they gave me a metal brace, so it went sort of like this. Okay? And then I had to wrap it up. And then there was a little piece of cloth that went over like this to hold it up. So it was this very, very complicated apparatus that I had to put together, and I'd lost the use of my left hand. My right hand, this hand. Okay. I immediately discovered that simple tasks like getting dressed were extremely difficult one-handed. And getting dressed in Michigan in winter isn't easy anyway, where you're having to layer and layer and layer and layer. But what I found next to impossible was tying my boots. I had some nice boots by then for Michigan winters. And try it someday. Put your hand behind your back and try tying your boots, because I couldn't get any leverage with my arm. And so I could sort of do this halfway tying job, but it was really awful. And it would inevitably come untied by the time I got roughly halfway up to the department. And I discovered that that's right where the Ann Arbor Library is. So I started stopping at the library. I would go up to the desk, and I would be like this, and I'd go to one of the librarians and say, "Could you please tie my shoes?" And they always did. Surprisingly, I asked people in town, I asked people at Meijer, I asked people at White Market, I asked people in the union. I was never refused anytime I asked people, to tie my shoe. That really, really surprised me. And I was sort of, wow, these Michiganders, they're really quite nice. Then it was that Thursday, so this was almost a week after I'd broken it. They were really advancing the therapy on this, the physical therapy. They said, look, you need to get that arm mobile again, otherwise it's going to end up frozen here. And those of you who've had me for a class, you realize I have a tendency to stand like this a lot. I'm not trying to be Napoleon, it's just my arm feels very comfortable in that position. So, I went to therapy. Of course, they scheduled it for 7 in the morning, and we had an ice storm that morning. So I'm having to go through all of these slick surfaces, and I was just, oh my gosh, I've left California. There's no warm weather here. Betty's leaving. My bike doesn't exist anymore other than a piece of sculpture. And then I got in for the physical therapy. This was over at University Hospital, and they processed me real fast, put me in the back. In the back there, it looks scarily like a German slaughterhouse. I mean, it's tiled all along, and they've got these big racks along the top. And they sat me down and said, your therapist will be with you in a moment. So I'm sitting there, and there's this guy next to me who had been in a car wreck, and he had lost the use of both of his legs. There was a guy on the other side of me who had been in an accident in Ypsilanti. He had lost his hand. And I'm sort of, wow, a couple of weeks and I'll have the full use of my arm back. These guys aren't ever going to get the full use of their limbs back. It really, really did put things into perspective for me. For the first time over at university hospitals, it suddenly dawned on me, you have taken your body, you have taken mobility for granted. You shouldn't do this. This is something that is fragile, and this is something that can be taken away from you if you're not very careful. So sort of that fragility of the body. Okay, put that into short-term storage. We'll be pulling that out later on in the talk. Okay, then it was time to go home. Quote, home. It was time to go visit my parents in Florida. My parents had just moved from Texas to Florida. It was a move they immediately regretted. As my dad said, there's nothing but old people here. And I'm sort of, well, Dad, you're old. He didn't like that. So I had not seen my parents in about a year and a half with all of the moving that they were doing and the moving that I was doing. And during that time, my mom had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. So this was my first encounter with this. I flew down to Orlando, and from Orlando to where my parents live, it's about an hour-and-a-half drive. And on that drive, my mom kept asking me the same set of questions over and over and over. Of course, I was expecting something along these lines. But she'd ask me, how is the weather in Michigan? How do you like Michigan? How is your arm doing? About 15 minutes, she'd repeat the exact same set of questions. And I'd go ahead and answer those sets of questions again. My dad kept giving me these, see, it's a very serious problem. While I was down there, one of the things that I've always done at home, and I really appreciated it down in Florida after Michigan was just sit out on the patio in the chairs, you know, the little lounge chairs. And I'd sometimes be seated out there, and my mom would come out there, and she'd sit next to me, and she'd simply put her hand on top of mine. She wouldn't say anything, but she'd simply place her hand on top of mine. And every evening, I could take all of this stuff off so that I could take a shower, and then I had to put it all back on. And every evening, my mom would wrap that up for me. And it was just so neat having that touch. And she wasn't speaking very much, and I think she was aware that she was repeating herself. The night before I came back, I was in bed, sort of, it must have been around midnight or so. I wasn't quite asleep, wasn't quite awake. And all of a sudden I felt someone down on the bed. And I sort of looked up, and it was my mom. And she sat there, and she looked at me, and she said, "I want you to know that I really tried with you guys. I did the best job that I could in trying to raise you. I did the best I could." And then, you know, I'm sort of sitting there going, ooh. I said, "Thanks." And then she said, "I'm very scared. I'm falling into a deep black hole, and I can't get out of that hole. And I'm very scared about that." And so I simply took her hand in mine and held it for a few minutes. It was obvious that my mother was fully aware of what was happening to her. This was a brilliant woman, a woman who was extremely influential in my life, and she realized that she was slowly and inexorably losing her mind. After about 15 minutes, I said, "You should probably go back to bed," and I walked her back into the master bedroom. My dad, of course, slept through this. He was snoring away. Put her in bed and kissed her good night. That basically was the last coherent conversation I ever had with my mother. She's still alive, but she no longer recognizes me. She simply doesn't know who I am. She knows I'm a safe person, but she doesn't know that I'm her son. Next morning, over to the airport and fly back to Detroit. It was a very different Eric who landed in Detroit this time from the guy who had landed in Detroit in early November. I no longer took my body, my mobility for granted. These were very, very important and precious commodities to me. The ability to stand up, to walk, to lift your arms. These are small miracles that we just don't tend to appreciate as much as we really ought to. I think it's built into our psychology that we take them for granted. Likewise, my mind, which I had simply always assumed, okay, you're pretty good at memory, you're real good at standardized tests and such, and you know, someday you're going to die of old age. And suddenly realizing, no, it might not be that simple. There is a very real possibility that at some point to realize that you're losing your mind also, and there isn't going to be anything to do about it. And so when I got back here, I realized, hey kid, you got a body that's halfway decent. You got a mind that's halfway decent. Let's cut the crap and use both of these. So when we had the first day of class here, this was winter of '92. I was doing 2 classes that term. I'm now into the second part of the talk, where I'm talking about my first term here. And I was doing microbiology up at the med school, and I was doing cell and molecular biology in the natural sciences building. First day of classes, winter 1992, we had 15 inches of I felt like I was teaching in Greenland. So here's my first time in front of my students. And here I am, this guy, fresh from California, and I passed out my 3x5 cards. I want to get this Snoopy information. And they're sort of, what are these cards for? And I'm sort of, wait and see, I'll talk about this in a bit. And so I started asking, okay, what are your names? Where are you from? Those of you who've had me, you know the spiel, you know what I go through. And they're sort of looking up at me and sort of writing this stuff down. Where are you from? Where's your hometown? And draw a little map for me. I wanted to learn some Michigan geography in the process. And one person actually asked, why do you want this information? Very, very suspicious. And I'm, look, I just want to communicate with you guys. And then the last question I always ask is, give me your suppressed desire. Looked at me as though my hair had caught on fire. And I was looking, I still have those cards. I was looking through those cards. I was going to read some of them, but more than half of the class put, I don't have any suppressed desires. And so I'm sort of, okay, the Midwest is going to be a little bit different from the way it was in California. Most of the other half of the class put down a suppressed desire and then blotted it out with 3/4 of the ink that was in their pen. Okay, the term got started, and in fact, I was and continue to be enormously impressed by the caliber of student that I've encountered here. It's something, I've said this at numerous opportunities. I think I say this in my first lecture before all classes. You guys are bright. You guys are extremely talented. I am looking out here now on some of the brightest people on this planet. You guys have a truly, truly bright future in front of you. We'll be getting to that in a bit. So things were working fairly well. I gradually got to know the students. We had a crisis point, a potential crisis point. This was about late March. Val and I, Val was the new prep person. She started in January. She ended up being very good, but she only stayed for a year. One of the things that we did in micro labs is we do body swabs, general body swabs, to determine what sort of microbes do you have on various parts of your body. And so we do swabs, we do outside of the nose swabs, we do behind the ear swabs, we do general skin swabs, and we do rectal swabs, which is exactly what you think it is. And Val was sort of, I don't think these students are going to want to do these. And I'm sort of, well, we'll see. What I'll do is I'll just go ahead and tell them that we used to do this in California. We didn't. But I figured I'd say that. And so when the critical event came and I had to get several volunteers to go ahead and do this, we actually have one of those volunteers in the audience tonight. They sort of looked at me rather strangely and said, you don't really want us to do this, do you? And I go, oh, yes. We used to do this routinely in California. There's no problem. And in fact, it ended up that you guys were pretty good sports about that. A lot of people, see, what you do is you do the foul deed with the swab, and then you streak it onto a plate. These guys got very artistic. They put their initials on the plate. One guy did a smiley face, which I thought that was really neat. And as soon as the first person went down to the bathroom, and I realized, my gosh, they're going to do it, I ran down to Val in the prep room, and Val, they're actually going to do it. She goes, no, they're not. Yeah, they really they're going to do it. So at that point, I began to realize, hey, these guys actually have some degree of trust in me. That's kind of neat. What I'm going to do now, we're into about April of that term, and I'm going to give 4 examples of 4 students, and these are going to be sort of archetypical examples. I'm not sure if they're here, so I'll give them different names. The first example was over in the Natural Sciences building. I went into the cell and molecular biology labs, and I was just doing a head count. One of the students was missing. And I looked at his lab partners and I said, "Where's Bob?" And they went like that. And I'm sort of, "What's he doing downstairs?" And they went, "No." And they were doing that. Bob